Welcome to the Inside Housing Podcast, where we break down the housing process, real estate, and investing. Here we go. Welcome, Tony. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so I'm actually really excited about this particular conversation because I want to get into some of the legislative pieces behind housing, especially in Vermont. So, yourself as a realtor and a legislator, I feel like you're going to have a very unique perspective. So I'm excited to start the chat.
All right. I'll start with just a little bit about myself. So, as you mentioned, I'm a realtor and I serve on the Commerce and Economic Development Commission at the House of Representatives. It's elected in 2024. I'm from Milton, and I represent most of the Route 7 corridor of Milton.
Okay.
And a little bit of Georgia area. So I will give you my perspective from that level. Commerce and economic development typically deals with consumer protection, workforce development, things like that. However, because housing deals heavily with, if you don't have housing, you don't have a workforce. Mm-hmm. So we wind up getting involved in a fair amount of the legislation.
So one of the things I wanted to ask is, what is like the main focus of some of the committees that you're on?
Actually, commerce and economic development, our area of jurisdiction is workforce. Because of the workforce development, we wind up working on most of the legislation for tech centers and on-the-job training and things like that.
What are the bigger things right now that the Vermont legislator is dealing with, specifically in regard that's going to affect housing in Vermont?
Well, I think, of course, the elephant in the room is Act 250, and we are working on trying to modernize that.
So back up. So if somebody doesn't know exactly what Act 250 does, what does it do?
So Act 250 is the primary legislation on development, not just commercial, or not just housing, but commercial development as well. If you've ever wondered why we don't have a Walmart supercenter or an Amazon warehouse, that's because of Act 250. Because if you have a commercial property, you cannot build anything more than 1 acre without permission.
Without permitting from the state.
Without permitting from Act 250. As far as housing, you can only build 10 houses within a 5-year period.
Is that the 10-5-5 rule?
Yeah, that's 10-5-5 rule.
Okay.
Unfortunately, a lot of the restrictions comes from Environment Committee.
Are there environmental limitations attributed to Act 250?
That's the primary thing that's really stopping development is the environmental considerations. Okay. In addition to those things, you have if anything with, I think it's 4,000 feet, you can't build without an Act 250, no matter how big or small. In my opinion, probably the most restrictive thing that we're having to deal with is the road rule. So right now, if you're wanting to build a house or housing development, if the road is going to extend longer than 800 feet, you need to get an Act 250 permit.
How difficult are these permits to get through?
They're horribly difficult. We had someone that spoke I'm part of a caucus for Vermont's economic economy. We can talk about that a little later, but we had a gentleman there who is out of Rutland, and he is trying to convert a car dealership. So it's adjacent to residential. And he has spent $850,000 in 3 years, wow. And he hasn't even put a shovel in the dirt. And the biggest problem we have is there's no consistency. So he'll go and say, what do I need to do? And they say, well, you need to do this. He'll go and put together do what he needs to do to get the permit, hire engineers at several $1,000s an hour to get the stuff done, bring it back to Act 250 and say, or whoever he's working with in the permitting and say, oh, no, you did it wrong. You need to do this, this, and this, and then you have to come back. 3 months later, after another several $1,000s to the engineers, goes back, oh, no, you got this wrong. You're going to need to go back and do it again. And that right there is the biggest problem with Act 250. as restrictive as it is, the more painful point is it's not consistent. You are subject to the whim of whoever's issuing the permit.
Are there any benefits to it in terms, because it was implemented with obviously good intention. So are there any benefits to it?
Yeah, the original reason it was implemented, from my understanding, it was actually implemented back in 1970. And at the time, there was a tremendous amount of development, and in the state of Vermont, we had very few planning commissions. There's almost no regulation for anything. So Act 250 was created to bring a state level regulation.
Okay.
Among their concerns, they didn't want industry coming in and building these 100-acre, toxic waste dumps. But a town with only 5,000 people looks at the grand list and thinks this is going to bring $100 million in taxes. So they just do they just let it sit there. And that was kind of why they did it, is to prevent those kinds of things. And since then, it's just old regulation. Our governor mentioned, he talked about education, but I think this very much applies to Act 250, it's like having a furnace from the 1950s. Does it work? Sure, it works, but it's horribly inefficient. It consumes a lot of gas, and frankly, it's just old and expensive, and it's not as effective. Whereas if you were to put a new furnace in, your heating, you're going to be 10 times more efficient. You're going to use less fuel, all those kinds of things. And that's really what we need to do with Act 250. It just needs to be modernized.
So right now there's an amendment to Act 250 on
Correct.
the floor. And it talks about basically tiers, developmental
Correct. Act
tiers.
181.
Act 181. So there's tier A, B, and C, and it sort of says where there are more or less regulations. So how would you describe the proposed changes as they are?
So there are four different places that are commonly, I think there's a few more, but I'll talk about these four. There's Tier 1A, Tier 1B, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So Tier 2 is basically what we have now.
Now, across the state?
It's not, well, so let me take a step back. Right now, we have rolled back a lot of the Act 250 regulations. I can't remember the name of the act off the top of my head, but this was actually passed, I believe, in 23. That allows if you live in a town where there's water and sewer and you're not in a flood zone, you can build up to 5 units in 1 acre. And
That's right.
It's designed where even the towns, I serve on the planning commission in Milton, and when that law passed, Milton is a very business friendly, we're very development friendly. So we only needed to tweak our regulations a little bit, but there's some places where it was a lot to allow for those types of things because the law said you need to allow this. There's also part of that had to do with accessory dwellings and things like that. And right now, because of the interim exemptions, I think you can build up to 50 units under those same rules.
Okay.
So, but Act 2, the Tier 2 is pretty much all across. That's any place, that's like the default.
That's the
if
default.
you don't choose
Good way of
anything
explaining.
else. Now, Tier 1B is designed for neighborhood centers, downtowns, things like that. And that will have more permanent reduced regulations for Act 250.
Okay.
For example, you can build up to 50 housing units. And in order to get Tier 1B, you first need to be recognized by the regional planning commissions. Let me step back on regional planning commissions. So Vermont technically doesn't have a county government, but if there was, the closest thing we have is the regional planning commissions. And they basically set a lot of the rules and the guidelines. They don't necessarily have authority to tell you what you can and can't do, but they can. But they do give you guidance, and they do control money. So if you want to do something particular, if it's something that a regional planning commission wants, they usually have some resources to allow them to get there. To those who are willing to do that. But they are in the process right now of mapping what the Tier 1B and the Tier 1A areas are. I don't know a whole lot of details on how that's done, but Tier 1B is limited regulation. The next tier up is Tier 1A, and Tier 1A is no regulation.
Okay, and I think I was looking at the map, and it's really concentrated in, it looks like part Chittenden County, parts of Rutland County, and I forget what the third one was. But okay, so they're going to help those areas by taking away some regulations. But the vast majority looks like it's falling in the other tiers.
It's going to fall in the other tiers, correct.
And so after Tier 1B, what does that look like?
So
You have Tier 1C and
no, there's no Tier 1C. There's Tier 2, which is what I was just saying. Tier 3 is conservation, and that is going to see much more regulation.
And so how does that, when we talk about this and somebody's listening and they're saying, okay, Act 1, 2, and 50, they're doing all these things, how is that then impacting the ability to basically build houses? I mean, because most of Vermont is rural.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, there's a couple of different things. I mean, number one, honestly, there are some towns that absolutely do not want development. And that's why we had to do the opt-in. I know of two towns, I won't mention them here, but they are vehemently opposed to any development. They want to keep it nice and rural and country. And there's nothing we can really do. As far as the other places, I think the biggest problem is it just doesn't pencil out if someone wants to make a development. When you have to go through that whole Act 250 permitting process, I was just telling you about that guy in Rutland. Well, that's a problem no matter who you are for the developer. So now, I mean, when you wonder why housing is so expensive. Well, when a developer, I think the numbers I were hearing was it's like $400,000 to build a house. That's the developer's cost.
That's the developer.
That's the developer's cost.
Start to finish, that's an average.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the regulation. And of course, the other problem we have here is finding we have a real work shortage, and it just to find someone, I mean, you can use this or not, but I just came back from vacation in North Carolina. My sister-in-law, she lives in a development. I got there Sunday, March 1st, and there was a house in her development that they just laid down the slab. When I left Sunday, March 8th, that entire house was done except the siding.
Wow.
And that's the kind of stuff, that's what we need here. That makes it, even then, that place is going for $300,000.
Isn't it a bit of a sort of catch-22, right? Because you need the people to be able to build at that kind of speed.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also need the affordability of people coming here and being able to afford it. So then how do we get there? Like, is these things with like the current proposals going to help that drive towards more like affordable building, or are these things going to hurt that?
I think it's going to, the good news is, I think some of the reform we're passing and some of the reform we're looking at now, I think it's really going to help the situation out. The bad news, it's probably not going to happen over the next 10 years because of the amount of regulation that we need to weed through. There's, even if we, I mean, as it is, our tax policies make it very difficult for businesses to stay here. And, I can't tell you, in commerce, we've talked with businesses, and these aren't like little rinky-dink businesses. These are like multi-million-dollar businesses that have hired people. And we're talking six-figure income for these people. And they wound up eventually, after 4 months, 6 months of looking for a house, said, I'm sorry, I can't take the job. So how long can you go like this before you say, look, we're gonna have to move? It just, like you said, it just adds to that catch-22. We're going to solve the housing crisis one way or another. Either last year in 2025, 1,800 people left the state. 1,800 people left the state. Well, the good news is that's 1,800 new homes that are available now.
That is one way of looking at it. It's true. Yeah.
And if we continue on the path we're going, or we have been going on, that's, unfortunately, that's only the beginning.
Well, I think some of the the data that's come out. I think it's the Vermont Futures Project that they're talking about. They quoted what 30, so is it 24,000 or 36,000 homes that we need to meet our growth objective. Is there a way that the legislator can get there with some of these changes, or does it have to be even more radical changes than that?
On paper, we could get there, but in practicality, it's never going to happen. There's just no way we would get people in the legislature to agree to what we need to do. What we really need to do is just completely get rid of all this regulation. I'm not saying like no regulation, but that really needs to be streamlined. I was taught. Let me back up. I was telling you about the caucus for Vermont's economy. So for those who don't know, a caucus is basically a group of people. Usually it's in political places that have a common interest. And what we do is we get together and we talk with people and we interview people. And what we do as a caucus is we are a united front. So we look at legislation that would benefit what the caucus, the objectives of the caucus, and then we'll rally around it. So a caucus we started this year, I didn't start it, but I'm a member of, is the Caucus for Vermont's Economy. It is a bipartisan caucus. There's probably about 20 members I know there's both Republicans and Democrats, but we went and looked at the state of Virginia, and they have a permitting process that is a dream.
What makes it a dream?
You go to a website, you tell them what you want to do for a project. It tells you all the permits you need, everyone you need to reach out to get those permits. And then while you're going through it, you can log on to that website anytime, and it'll tell you who's working on your permit and how far along they are.
Wow. So is our system designed the way that it is just from habit, just continually trying to regulate out of certain problems, and it's just like we need to wipe the slate clean?
Our system is designed to protect the environment at all costs.
Now, there's a lot of individuals who think that's important, right? Like,
Sure.
I think the environment's important. We got to
I
protect
do too.
it. So where's the balance, right? Because you have to find balance in a system where you can ideally achieve both aims. So, what do you say to those who are like, no, we need to make sure that the environment's protected and we're doing all these things while being able to grow economically?
Well, the problem is right now we have a zero carbon footprint policy. And basically what that means is that the objective is to produce no carbon footprint. In other words, it's like we're not even here. And I don't think that's unrealistic. All right, if you eat a berry, you've created a carbon footprint. And what we need to do is go from a no carbon footprint to a minimal carbon footprint. I think there is a place where we can love and respect the environment and we can allow for development.
Is there legislature around that, or is that all tied to sort of the things going on with like Act 250 and all that?
There is there's a variety of different things that goes on. I mean, the green books, and that's what we call the law books, are basically two bookshelves of encyclopedias. And there are a lot of laws, there are a lot of rules, and there's just no way any of us can go through. But as they come up, as things show up, we do what we can to regulate it. But there's also opposition. And part of the problem is the way the infrastructure works here, in that the way not the infrastructure, the way the structure of the legislature works is when a bill is, anyone can put a bill in. When that bill is put in, it is given to the speaker's house, to the speaker's office, and then the speaker will send that bill to be looked at to a committee of jurisdiction. So really, the Speaker for the House is one of the most powerful people in Montpelier, because she determines where a bill goes. So if the Speaker, and I'm not saying she is, but if the speaker wants to, is very pro-environmental and doesn't want a zero carbon footprint, like I said, I'm in no way saying that's the way our speaker is. In fact, I know for a fact she's not. Then she makes sure that a development bill goes to the environment. Problem solved. Because all the people on the environment committee, and rightfully so, are very concerned about the environment. That's a good thing. You want people on the environment committee that are concerned about the environment. And what goes on once it gets to the committee of jurisdiction, that committee makes the determination as to whether that bill is even looked at. We have a bulletin board on the wall, and got a little 5x7 card with every single bill that has gone to your jurisdiction. So if there happens to be a bill in a committee and they don't want to deal with the political fallout, or they just plain don't like the bill, especially if they happen to be the chair of the committee, they can say, yeah, I think we're just going to leave it on the bulletin board. And it never gets looked at. So we have a lot of great bills, a lot of good ideas that will never see the light of day.
So what do you think are some of the bills that have a reasonable chance of making it through that will have positive impact on housing this cycle?
I mean, a lot of it has already been done. We took care of it, and so I think certainly Act 180, when it was at 181.
181.
Yeah, that's created a lot of good stuff, and I think it's just a matter of waiting that, letting that work through. The CHIP bill, I think, is going to be a tremendous help.
What is the CHIP bill?
So the CHIP bill stands for Community Housing Infrastructure Project, and it is a funding mechanism for developers and towns where if you have a 10-acre parcel of land, well, you want to build houses on it, and let's just forget that there's even Act 250 regulation at all. You still need to put water sewer in. You still need to put roads in. You still need, all these different infrastructure things. And a lot of that stuff, especially in these smaller towns, it just doesn't pencil out. So what CHIP does is it provides a funding mechanism where a town or a developer, depends on what's in the contract, can borrow money off of the grand list, the future value. So to back up on that 10-acre parcel, well, a 10-acre parcel of nothing is worth a lot less than a 10-acre parcel with 10 houses on it. Mm-hmm. Huge difference in price. And what it does, it allows a town to borrow off of the future value of the property. So if you have a 10-acre parcel of land that's worth $1 million, and after you put the infrastructure in and build the housing, it's now worth $10 million, the town can bond for that $9 million of appreciation. And I'm just throwing numbers out. Those aren't by any means accurate or anything like that. And it allows, so what can be done is, with TIF, there was a huge process of regulate. You had to get it had to meet certain criteria for this and that and the other thing. Whereas CHIP allows a municipality to work with a contractor, and they will create a contract that they both agree to abide by. And sometimes that will involve the developer footing the bill for that with the understanding that they'll get reimbursed for those. Sometimes it's a tax freeze. So, they'll freeze the value of the property, and even after the property is built, the developer's not going to have to pay as much in taxes. It'll still be at that lower tax rate. And sometimes the town, like traditional TIF, will bond for the money. And what they'll do is they'll go to the town and say, and you actually have to vote for it in the town. And then because if you default, it comes out of the property taxes of the town.
So we already have that, and then you have the CHIP Act that you're adding to that. So those sound like net positives.
Yes, they are. In fact, I know of at least three. There are 3 communities that have already started their applications with CHIP.
Okay.
And they're already starting through the process of trying to. I think it was. I want to say it's like $40 million we put aside.
So that would be a net positive. That's going to add
Oh
the
yeah.
ability to develop and kind of get through some relation. So for you, where do you see the most hope for sort of getting to a place where we have even more of those and more development going on around?
I think that right now, I think we're doing about as much as we can. I don't know as if there's any more realistically. I mean, I'd love to just get rid of like 90% of the regulation, but the devil's in the details and you have to figure out what regulation to get rid of. And I think the overall feeling is getting rid of more regulation. There are two things that come to mind that I think would really help. And one kind of has a little bit of traction. The other one is more of an idea. The one thing that's been a real issue, and I think I mentioned earlier, was the 800-foot road rule. And we are looking at a bill that would repeal that, or at the very least extend it to 2,000. And that would allow certain properties, certain parcels, depends, they wouldn't have to go through that Act 250 regulation to build on it. The other, I guess there's three. The other thing that we're looking at doing is funding for, a lot of people don't know this, but we actually have 3 assembly plants in the state of Vermont that assemble manufactured homes.
Really?
They're all defunct. And we're looking at funding to revitalize these. And if we can get even one of these manufacturing plants back online, because I'll tell you, one of the biggest expenses for putting in manufactured housing is the cost of delivering it from Pennsylvania. Imagine what we could do if it was just built in, Fairfield or something like that.
So this would basically funnel money to some of these assembly plants and like revitalize them, get them going again.
Correct. And in addition, it would create some jobs. And then the third thing is, this one's more of an idea, but some of our environmental rules are just ridiculous. For example, if you're building near a swamp, you need to have a 50-foot buffer. And basically what that means is you need to leave the 50 feet surrounding the swamp undisturbed. That can be a real big problem if you imagine, even if you have like a 10-acre parcel and even just 1 acre of it is swampland. Well, you've just eliminated 4 acres of your parcel.
Yeah.
And reducing that to like 25 feet or something like that. That's more of an idea, and we're not sure. I don't think there's been any legislation in it, but it's certainly an avenue we want to go down and see if there's more we can do there. I mean, it's pretty sad when a ski resort can't maintain a trail because they would trigger Act 250. That's just dumb.
Yeah. That's it's a little bit difficult. So, how long have you been in the legislature now?
This is my second year, my first term.
So, what are some of the things that you in particular are sort of trying to get behind the most?
Well, right now, like that whole caucus for Vermont's economy, what I really want to do is I want to see if we can work through some of this legislation, some of our regulation, and see if we can combine it, reduce it. That's really my focus in terms of development. I would like to see a little more work on the commercial side too, maybe increasing the trigger to two acres or something like that. So that's really what I'm getting behind it as far as development. And other projects. I mean, certainly I would love to see more education reform. Our committee we have jurisdiction over CTE.
What is
and
that?
Centers for Technical Education. And basically, this is an alternative to college. Instead of going to college for 4 years and getting a degree, you go to a trade school and you learn a trade or a skill. And then you can apply that almost immediately. There are a lot of benefits, and it's something in high demand. I don't know how many of your listeners are local, but try finding a plumber. Try finding an electrician. Try finding a builder. Once again, I'll get back to my example in North Carolina. So my sister-in-law she moved down there from Vermont. She left because she couldn't deal with the taxes anymore. It was too expensive. We got there Monday. She called someone in to put a patio in. They're starting work today. In contrast, I need a new porch in my house. I talked with a builder in October. and said, yeah, we've approved this. I called him a couple weeks ago and said, well, we've got the money. Let's get this going. He says, well, I'm booked till July. But I know you, Tony, you're a good guy. I can probably squeeze you in.
Isn't that more reflective of just sort of like the conundrum that Vermont's in, which is because a lot of people want to be here. It's a beautiful state.
They do.
I mean, it's safe. It's friendly. There's a lot of reasons, aside from the fact that it's cold
Right.
a lot of the year. But it's sort of like we're trying to attract people. We're trying to get them here. Cost of living keeps coming up as an issue. But in order to reduce the cost of living, we need to get the people here, build more so that we can get those costs lower. So when this economic, you said development committee caucus?
The caucus for Vermont's economy.
The caucus for Vermont's economy, right? It's bipartisan, so obviously there's a lot of legislators who represent that this is the issue we need to be dealing with. Is the vision and the small steps in between, does it square up? It's got to have a lot of support for what you're trying to do.
Well, I think what we want to do is at least get our housing quota to where it needs to be. I mean, you and I just talked about we need, 32,000 houses.
Yeah.
And, what can we do to bring that forth and set up some sort of legislation to perpetuate, at least match growth going forward.
And when they're discussing this, right, and this is something that it gets talked about, the amount of houses that we need, right, and housing can fall into different criteria, right? A condo can be considered a house, but there's a bit of that dream, right, which is you want to have your single family home, right? You want to have ideally maybe not even a ton of land, but like quarter acre, half an acre, right? So is the idea to do these things to build those kinds of homes, or is it just getting to those homes in general?
Well, I think this is where we get into a lot of the compromising of it all, is that one thing that there is an incredible fear of in the state of Vermont is what we like to affectionately call McMansions. And these are developers who are going to use the reduced regulation, take advantage of it, and buy and build $1 million houses because the profit margin is so much higher on that. So that's where the balance comes in. I personally think it's a little overblown with proper regulation. One of the reasons why you see that is because that's the only way a developer can make any money. I mean, if we're talking about $400,000, just their cost, they got to make something. So, and a lot of the programs do have some affordability tied to them. And one of the things that I really like about CHIP is that there is it does require, you can actually build multi-use, but it needs to have at least over 50% residential component. Now, there are certain situations where it doesn't have to be, but they're very situational, and that is where their economic development for the state comes in. And like, for example, if you're trying to convert a school to apartments, well, maybe with the gym, the gym alone is 50%, or a situation where you have a 2-story building and it's in a downtown and you want the bottom half to be commercial. Those are situations where you wouldn't quite hit the 50% threshold, but we've carved that out a little bit. But the other thing is that while they are taking advantage of the CHIP program, they have to keep the money, they have to keep the housing perpetually affordable. So they can only mark it up. We have 2 tiers. There's low income and there's middle income. So for perspective, like a middle income would be like a single person that makes about $75,000 to $80,000 a year.
And so along those lines, how come we just don't expand the CHIP districts or TIFs? Or is it just that the towns have to voluntarily petition to be a part of them?
Well, that actually was a real topic on the CHIP. The CHIP program can be used pretty much anywhere.
Is it opt-in, or do you just allocate that, hey, this district, this area is going to be, you know,
So CHIP isn't opt-in directly, but it kind of is indirectly. So in order to take advantage of the CHIP, you need to have it needs to be conforming with the local regulations. You need to have the blessing of the town. You need to have the blessing of the regional planning commission, and you need to have the blessing of the I think it's VEPSI, Vermont Economic Progress Council, who I think directly administers those funds. So if a town doesn't want extra development, they can just say no. We don't. The select board can say, yeah, no, we're not going to do this. Problem solved.
okay. So one of the things I want to ask while I have you here is, so you're doing this, and you've also been a realtor,
Correct.
right? You've been a realtor for a number of years. How do you think that helps you understand some of these issues and bring like a different perspective that otherwise wouldn't be there? Because we know that a lot of, real estate and being a realtor in general it's like the beginning for so many different kinds of careers. So how do you feel that's helped you in terms of being able to just give a unique perspective in your sort of time as a legislator?
Well, I think for me, it really helps more. Like I'm in commerce and economic development, and we deal with a lot of one of our purviews is banking. So it allows me to have a really good understanding on banking and insurance. Because of banking, I have a good background on how mortgages are done and things like that, and I can kind of bring that perspective when we're dealing with banking regulation. The other aspect, of course, there's things that, boots on the ground things, like one of the bills I put forward was, of course, in 2024, the legislature passed this mandatory flood disclosure, which is all great and all until you have a property that's a foreclosure and they haven't lived on the property, so they have no clue. So and they have a choice, yes or no. So how do you deal with that? So, and so it's given me, and there's a couple of other regulations I put forth just being in the industry that I can tweak. Another one was broker succession. We all know that if a broker dies, you can assign someone with an interim broker license. Well, that's well and good if they die, but what if they have a stroke? Now you're in a real conundrum because they're technically still alive.
Yeah.
So I put forth some legislation that would extend the ability to use a temporary broker if the person is incapacitated.
Got it.
Thirdly, I think one of the problems we deal with perpetually affordable housing is you're really creating a trap.
How so?
Well, I'll use myself as an example. I live in perpetually affordable housing. I bought my house in 2000, and because of the perpetually affordable aspect, I can only get 25% of the appreciated value.
Back up for a second. Define perpetually affordable housing.
Perpetually affordable means that once the property is built or put in whatever is offering it, in this case, it's a different. They buy land, they buy a house, they'll lease the land to the owner. You need to sell it for below market value. That's the whole point. So like take, for example, this situation. So if I bought my house in 2000 for $100,000 and it is now worth $300,000, I have to sell it for $150,000. I have to sell it because I only get to keep 25% of the appreciated value.
So you're not being able to take advantage of any of the equity that you're building up
Correct.
normally.
So in that scenario, you tell me, where can I find a decent house for $150,000 in this market?
That's a bit of an issue.
Mm-hmm. And what makes it worse is you're in some ways adding to the housing crisis, because I have a 3-bedroom apartment. My last child will be moving out before the end of the year. So now you have a couple that's taking up a 3-bedroom house. But I'm stuck there because I can't afford to find anything even close to equivalent, even downsizing, you know?
How many homes you think are like that in the state?
Oh, there's thousands. There are thousands like that. A lot of different organizations that do it.
And the intent behind an organization like that is because it keeps it affordable to get
Correct.
into. And what difference would it make whether or not the homeowner at some point, let's say you just put in you have to have it for 5, 10, 15 years. You just had something like that. Why not create something that would just allow at some point to be able, because otherwise you can't move.
I would love to do that, but that's just not the way the guidelines are written for, you know, all these organizations. They're getting funding to build the perpetually affordable housing, and that funding comes with the string that, you know, in order to build the housing, you need to keep it forever affordable. This comes from this concept that there's a mentality that some people have that if a person can take advantage of another person, they will.
And there's no way to change that? Aside, couldn't regulation change that, or is it?
Sure, regulation could change it, but it'd be a long road to do that. And you know, a lot of these people are taking funding, are taking advantage of funding that, I mean, this stuff's been on the books for years. And I don't know, even if you did get rid of it all, repealed it, I don't know if it would necessarily be retroactive. And I don't think we'd have the support. There's no way we would ever have the support for that. You know, the other problem with that is I don't have the equity to do even maintenance. So let's just take that scenario where I now have $50,000 in equity. If I have to put a new roof on, I've lived there for 25 years. There goes half of it. So now I only get 25,000. So
along the lines of like trying to develop more affordable housing, are there programs like that are out there and being sort of promoted to use as a way to get into the housing without realizing that, you know, you have this other giant issue on the other side of it?
Exactly. You know, and of course, one of the problems with putting a limit on the affordable housing is whoever happens to be living there when that limit hits, they're going to make bank. So I think it would have to be tied to how long you live there. You know, and I'd be fine with that. You know, in fact, I'm working with one of these nonprofits to come up with one of the things they do allow you to do with the one that I work with is you can do a capital improvement credit. And basically, if you put an addition on or something like that, they let you keep 100% of whatever that was. Whatever that, if you put if we put a second bathroom in and it upped the value of the property $8,000, we get to keep all 8,000.
Got it.
Which is great, and I'll accept it probably cost me 20,000 to put it in. But one of the problems you have is you're stuck if you need to do maintenance. Which what happens is these people that are in these perpetually affordable housing, it gets, you know, there's a lot of deferred maintenance. So what happens is, yes, when they do finally, if they were able to escape out of that perpetually not being able to get out, now they have, you know, whoever gets it next, they're going to be dumping some money in to do all this deferred maintenance that would have cost half as much 10 years ago.
That's an interesting problem. I didn't realize that was so prevalent as it was.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, it's a couple. There's several thousand properties that I would say are perpetually affordable in the grand scheme of things, which isn't much. I mean, it's probably single digits in percentages.
But still, I mean, every little bit. You know, the thing about Vermont is our size and scales make everything exaggerated, right? You know, like we have 1,800 people. If 1,800 people left like New York, it'd be like, so what?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like that's like 0.00%. But for us, you know, our percentages matter. So, you know, 3,000-4,000 houses here, 5,000 houses there, you know, that could get us to where we need to be. So it's an interesting perspective. I didn't realize that was as...
you know, unless you're talking about the environment. Now, if you're talking about the environment, every millionth of a percent matters.
Yes. Depending on what you're talking about. So aside from housing and real estate and all that, just what is something else that just Tony likes to do? Tony Micklus. What
Oh,
else do you do?
I love to travel. I just got back from vacation, North Carolina. I'm actually a PC gamer,
Okay.
so I like to play games. I'm not one of the crazy. I don't do like the first person shooters. I'm too old for that. But I like strategy games.
So you're also in IT though,
I'm
correct?
also in IT. Yes, I do. I do have an IT consulting business where I take care of clients all over the state and keep their computers safe and protected and help them pick the right software to do the job, provide desk side support, all that kind of stuff. So that's something I really like. That one, it's tough to keep up with everything though. The technology changes very quickly.
It seems like every day you wake up and something else is changing.
Cybersecurity, of course, the other thing is a
Absolutely.
big part of my business.
Yeah, and it's becoming a bigger part of all businesses right now. If only AI could manufacture houses,
Oh,
right?
yes.
We're waiting for the 3D printed house, even though I see some places are coming out with that.
Yeah, and I mean, getting back to the PC gaming, angle, I mean, there are people that are looking at building houses using Minecraft blocks.
My son would love the idea of that. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I mean, you basically take the block, and I mean, it's a real house, and you just fill it with concrete.
That would be something. We'd have kids everywhere, all over the state.
Exactly.
Like I know exactly what I'm doing for work. All right, Tony. Well, I really appreciate you coming on
Sure,
today.
anytime.
It's a really thoughtful conversation, and I know there's a lot to do. And good luck trying to get some of the things that you want to happen happening. It's a big
Thank you.
job and a big responsibility. And public service is, it's hard, right? You're putting yourself out there.
It is. It is. You're putting yourself out there, and you need to have a little bit of a thick skin because people are going to attack you for all sorts of things. I put out a weekly legislative post on the community boards, and if you want to see it, you're welcome. It's Tony for Vermont on Facebook, and I put out a weekly post which talks about some of the things that I do. I also put it out on Front Porch Forum and all the local boards, but you have to be either a Georgia or Milton resident to see those.
Do you also have a Substack?
I do have a Substack. Thank you. Yes. Yes. It's Tony for Vermont. Substack.com.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure to include your details so people can find you. All right. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep.
And that's that.